Here are some error categories you must be looking for. Incorrect invoice number. Incorrect invoice date. Incorrect invoice currency. Invoice amount. Credit memo posted as invoice. Invoice posted against incorrect PO. Incorrect invoice number. Impact. Invoice paid. Invoice not paid. Here, the vendors will face difficulties in allocating payments received. This will create confusion in ERP, while we try to locate the invoice and its payment status. Incorrect invoice number. Rectification. Invoice paid. Invoice not paid. Inform the vendor and see if they allocated the invoice accordingly. Also, for record purpose, post a credit memo and invoice with correct invoice number internally. Reverse the invoice and reprocess the invoice with the correct invoice number. Incorrect invoice date. Impact. Invoice paid. Invoice not paid. We may end up in making the payments earlier or later than the due date. Incorrect staging days may appear for pending invoices with incorrect invoice dates. Rectification. Invoice paid. No action required. Invoice not paid. Reverse the invoice and reprocess the invoice with correct invoice date. Incorrect invoice currency. Impact. Invoice paid. It may pay the vendor more or less according to the exchange rate of invoice currency. Invoice not paid. No impact unless the error is identified. Rectification. Invoice paid. Convert the currency paid with actual invoice currency, then see a credit or debit memo is required. Invoice not paid. Reverse the invoice and reprocess the invoice with correct invoice currency. Invoice amount. Impact. Invoice paid. Overpayment or underpayment can happen when paying vendors. Invoice not paid. No impact unless the error is identified. Rectification. Invoice paid. For overpayment, post a credit memo. For underpayment, post a debit memo. Invoice not paid. Reverse the invoice and reprocess the invoice with correct invoice amount. Credit memo posted as invoice. Impact. Invoice paid. Difficulties in funds allocation by vendor and overpayment to vendor. Invoice not paid. This impacts debit balance reporting. Rectification. Invoice paid. We need to post 2 credit entries, as one credit entry will nullify incorrectly invoice paid. Invoice not paid. Reverse the invoice and reprocess as credit memo. Invoice posted against incorrect PO. Impact. Invoice paid. This impacts AP ledger for invoice entries, as we need to post an internal credit memo and debit memo for rectifying this error. Invoice not paid. This impacts open PO reporting. Rectification. Invoice paid. Post a credit memo against incorrect PO and post an invoice against correct PO. Invoice not paid. Reverse the invoice and reprocess the invoice against correct PO.